real quickly, Justin Baldoni's met her first at a club. She was dancing, salsa dancing, professional dancer. He then was like captivated by her person. They ended up talking. It wasn't a hit on. They went out to coffee. And then Justin basically, instead of saying, "Hey, what's your number? Let's hang out," it was more like, "Hey, I've got a group of people that are getting together talking about elevated concepts, spirituality, how to be better, how to serve humanity. There's a group of women that are talking about this kind of thing. Would you be, whoa, who are you?
Mhm.
Like, you're not trying to like go to you."
Yeah.
Then she started coming around, and then she and I met shortly after. I like to tell the story that she hit on me, but she didn't. That she cornered me and was like, "Please take me out, take me out, take me out." And I was like,
Please,
"No, no, no."
please.
That didn't happen. Fast forward, we're becoming friends. We're doing these exercises where you kind of like look in each other's eyes for like as long as you can without blinking, and like, we're gonna
Mhm.
go whatever, all that stuff. And we are partnered up to. And in that moment, she likes to say that she saw me fall in love with her.
For real. Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. It took me long when I was doing the coverage, and I began doing the coverage on the story of this lawsuit between Blake Lively and Wayfair Studios and these PR individuals, and it took me long to go through the different assertions that were made by Blake Lively. And as I went through the assertions, each one of them appeared to fall apart after I was able to cross-reference them to evidence, and some of the claims that she made were easy to find, other ones were more difficult. Justin released video of them dancing, which certainly assisted and gave us a different perspective of how she described what went on. But the video you just witnessed is a tale of how Jamie Heath met his wife Natasha, and Jaime was buddies with and has been friends with Justin Baldoni years, and both men who practice the Baha'i faith, and both are members of a Baha'i community, and both have had, this long relationship. Jaime is now the CEO of Wayfair. He's a producer. He was the PGA producer of It Ends With Us. He recently was, served as an executive producer on Scarlett Johansson's new film Eleanor the Great in Cannes when the movie came out, and Wayfair was one of the productions that released that movie, and one of the stories that was involved in Blake Lively's lawsuit was that when she met Justin and Jamie, she said that they explained a conversation about how, Justin had met this woman, and then the woman was someone that he didn't wanted to date, and so then he passed her along to Jamie. Okay? And she made it sound like they were swapping girls, like she was explaining this woman like, near as in a derogatory term, like Jamie was receiving Justin's sloppy seconds, and she was upset by the idea that these two men would share a woman. And then I discovered that clip, and it's explaining how Jamie Heath married his wife Natasha, and how Justin met her at a club. They danced out, and they went out for coffee. Justin took her to church, and Jamie met her when Natasha visited church, and Justin did not date Natasha. They did not date, she was never his girlfriend. And there was no sloppy seconds, and Natasha and Jamie formed this relationship as they were undergoing their various exercises and getting to know one another in their faith. It's such a sweet story, and I'm not a religious person. I respect everyone's right to believe. And if this is how that they'd like to live their life, I think have at it. But to cast such a sweet story in such a horrid way in a lawsuit, it made me really feel sad for all of these women that are on a part of the story that are actually being attacked in such a wicked manner. That's my take, and I think a great deal about Natasha Heath, and I think a great deal about Emily Baldoni, who are the wives of Justin and Jamie, who, are under this umbrella of, and this cloud that their husbands were harassing this lady on set and being so inappropriate and making her so uneasy. It was so hostile. Yeah, so I consider what it would be like to be those women, knowing that that's not who their husband is. I also picked up on the fact that they mischaracterize news about, Justin, and how Justin struggled through and discussed learning about consent as a young man and learning, boundaries and lines and all of that, right? And he was really vulnerable and really open, and they employ that tale, Ryan and Blake, to attempt to portray him as a predator, which is simply not true. So I am sure after all these months that I don't believe a single word that happens to come out of Blake's mouth. I do not believe any of her accusations. I do believe they get everything wrong. I believe they misunderstand things. It's my opinion that they distort tales so that they are able to suit their own agendas. And it was also brought home to me when I actually received a letter today for a cease and desist from Stephanie Jones, when her attorney misread and misstated lawsuits of mine, informing me that I have a history of being defamatory and harassing of individuals, and that my intention is to harm businesses and reputations, and that's certainly not my intent. And then because I settled 2 lawsuits, one of which was dismissed in the state of Washington, and then there was private mediation later after there was several individuals like my side and the other side threatening to sue, and then another instance where one individual sued me, and then I sued them since they were doing things to me as well, and both cases settled with no liability, ever found no money changed. And she states, the rapid settlements of many of these cases are telling and reflect the indefensibility of your statements mischaracterizing what I've been quite candid about happened. I've always openly said that no money was exchanged, there was nothing that was indefensible, there was no one that demonstrated that I was defamatory or harassing of anyone, and then to also have that same individual defend a man that's being accused currently in court, in California, of human trafficking. And when I saw what they were capable of doing to me, I thought, well, it's quite easy, people think that they can twist stories, right? And so when I saw these amicus curiae appearing, I said what I thought and what I found and said, these appear to be late. The appellate court says that they're supposed to be 7 days after they're filed, after filing a brief. There isn't really a rule in the district court because amicus curiae aren't normal in the district court level, they're used largely in Supreme Courts and appellate courts. And so my suspicion was that Brian Friedman and the crew were going to request that the court either deny them or get them struck, and likely because they were late and irrelevant. And I got a lot of heat, several people, and different creators got kind of mad and told me that I was providing incorrect information. But Brian Friedman wrote a letter to the court, and I just want to inform you as to how he wants to approach these briefs since we've been discussing them this week. He sort of matches and models what I told you all, and he did this in such a nice manner because he did not want to diminish what these organizations are accomplishing, but non-parties, Equal Rights Advocates of California, Employment Lawyers Association, and the Women's Law Center for all sought leave to file a brief of an amicus curiae in aid of Blake Lively's motion to dismiss the amended complaint, fully briefed months ago. As explained hereafter, the court ought to deny the motion of the organization for leave to file a late-filed partisan amicus brief that is nothing more than a vehicle to reiterate Blake Lively's public tirades against the Wayfair parties, reiterate already made arguments by Lively, and present issues that are not material to the pending motion to dismiss. Although the Wayfair parties accord respect to the 3 amici-seeking organizations, their brief does not help the court perform its work at the pleading level. In case the court, for any reason, allows leave for the filing of the organization's brief, the Wayfair party ought to be allowed to file a responsive brief. They stated that the first issue, the organization submitted their delayed motion with Lively's agreement nearly 2 months after Lively's motion to dismiss had been entirely briefed, allowing Lively to continue an unjustified assault upon the Wayfair parties with inflammatory statements to the media. The motion is more of a publicity ploy for Lively than a helpful tool to the court in this pleading phase. And then they also include a footnote here that your Section IC of your Honor's individual practices and civil cases excludes motions for leave to file an amicus brief as a motion type allowed by letter motion. However, out of precaution, the Wayfair parties reply in kind and within the 2-day window for opposition. In any case, the motion must be denied, since neither it nor the respond proposed brief meets the restricted circumstances in which a district court is authorized to hear an amicus brief. The situations when this brief should be taken into consideration is to assist the court, and they are only limited on how they can do so. Hence, they should generally be permitted when a party is neither represented nor represented competently, and where the AMI has an interest in some of the other case that can be impacted by the ruling in this current case. And where those circumstances do not apply, leave to file it should be refused, particularly where the consul eliminates the necessity of further input. So what they're essentially saying is that, in this instance, they're only really supposed to come in here if they have something new to contribute other than what has otherwise been said by Blake's attorneys, or to assist someone who isn't represented or who doesn't have an attorney and who needs some assistance of the court. There is no intrinsic right to submit an amicus curiae brief to the court, especially where the applicant's sole concern is how this court is going to interpret the law. And that's what they're asking, is the court to interpret a law certain way. The organizations do not assert that live counsel is competent, nor do they identify any other case that may be affected by this court's decision on Lively's motion to dismiss. Rather, the organizations rely on their unique perspective as drafters and champions of California Assembly Bill 933, which is another way of saying that the organizations attempt to provide disguised, premature, and inappropriate expert testimony at the pleading stage. As observed in the Seventh Circuit, the majority of amicus curiae briefs are filed by allies of litigants and duplicate the arguments made in the litigants' briefs, in effect merely extending the length of the litigant's brief. Such briefs like this should not be allowed. They are an abuse. Interesting. He's calling the filing of these an abusive method. And that's a way to signal to the court that filings done in this way are an abuse of the process of the system, and that's how it can get removed off the docket. It's very similar to what her attorney said when it came to Ryan Friedman responding to their letter about the subpoena and how they got it struck. So an amicus is to be a friend of the court, not a friend of the party. While the W-Fair parties respect the work of the organizations, they are not neutral friends of the court, but rather advocates of specific policy interests that align not only with Lively's defensive posture but also her affirmative claims against the Wayfair party's C. Jones versus Bakura, denying leave a partisan advocacy group to file amicus brief because its usefulness is diminished at the trial level due to its obartisanship. In addition to the proposed brief raises issues that are not presented by Lively. One of the biggest issues that these briefs were claiming was that discovery that these cases need to be dismissed at the motion to dismiss level because people that are being sued and retaliated but with lawsuits, they want to avoid the discovery process, right? But Blake has already opened up discovery, and I think I mentioned that last week or earlier this week when they filed these, was that Blake is suing them, and so discovery is already open, and it's a moot point. In Blake's case, they said the proposed brief focuses on the need to avoid abuses of discovery in sexual harassment cases, which is an issue that was not raised by Lively, who did not move for a state of discovery, and in any event is not applicable to the dispute given Lively's pending affirmative claims discovery is well underway, and these arguments are inopposite. They're irrelevant to this case, so they're telling the court the reason that they should dismiss it is to, make it so that discovery is reduced. Again, they already have discovery going on. They say, finally, the proposed brief violates the timing guidelines used by district courts for such briefs. While the federal rules of civil procedure do not address the submissions of amicus briefs, district courts have looked for guidance to Rule 29 of the Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure, which provides that an amicus brief and motion for leave must be filed no later than 7 days after the principal brief of the party being supported is filed. The organizations filed their proposed brief more than 2 months after the Lively filed her motion to dismiss well beyond the window outlined in the Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure, as the Wayfair parties would need time to respond to the proposed brief. A decision on Lively's motion to dismiss would be further delayed by its inclusion, weighing against granting leave since parties should have their dispute resolved without any unnecessary delay. Where the filing of an amicus curiae brief would cause such a delay, it should not be accepted for those foregoing reasons, and with all due respect to the prospective amici, the court should deny the motion. So really, the way it's being framed is that these people have the right intentions, right? They're doing this for the reasons that they believe are, important to them. But the reasons they're doing it is to attempt to inform a judge how to construe the law, which isn't what you do with these briefs. And it's also being done for Blake directly in favor of her claims, which is partisan in the sense that they've taken a side and they're not actually being a friend of the court, they're being a friend of Blake because they're relitigating what's already on her motion to dismiss. And every time you include something new to the docket, like we've been seeing, it's that anytime that you add something new to the docket, it delays everything further. So think of all of the different filings that have been made. There's a motion to compel to by Leslie Sloan. There's a motion to quash a subpoena by Stephanie Jones related to the Edgeworth security, which is how John Abel's phone was forensically retrieved, the data and the material. And then there are motions to dismiss for Leslie Sloan, Ryan Reynolds, Blake Lively. There are third-party motions to dismiss for Stephanie Jones. There's third-party complaints for Jen Ale. There's several motion to compels for Blake Lively that are still pending, and now you're adding this, and there's two motions for sanctions. So all of these motions just cause further delay, because all these rulings must be made before he decides on anything else. And so he has significant decisions with the motions to dismiss the remainder of these discovery issues. Most of them may not even come up to be ruled upon, because by the time he reaches them, those issues could be mooted, but the manner in which these documents were worded, these individuals came in and they re-legitimized her claims against Baldoni and essentially made it appear that Baldoni is this bad, abusive sexual harasser who's threatening her with a retaliatory lawsuit and informing the court that this is a retaliatory lawsuit interfering in the process because she already presented that argument herself. And Blake has very high-powered, high-priced lawyers. She certainly doesn't need assistance for some advocacy groups, and they're stating that she's doing this particularly to continue abuse Wayfair in the media, and considering that the judge has been extremely sensitive to what they're putting on the docket, I believe it was a wise decision on their part, without offending the organizations that, listen, we don't need your assistance, we don't need to prolong this any further. I've reported on a lot of cases over the years, and this is the first case I've ever seen it in before it goes to an appeals court. Now, I know some people have said that Amber Heard did this, and clearly that did Amber no good. Amber lost. Well, I guess it was a split decision, right? Like, he was found liable for one thing, and she was found liable for a bunch of things. They actually did end up settling, but, a bunch of organizations came out and said that Amber was the victim, and they continue to state that Amber's the victim, despite the fact that the court doesn't concur that she was the victim in the first place. She appears to be playing by the same playbook as Amber Heard, which those of you who watched the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial have seen, and I didn't watch that case, so I can't say. So that's one part of what's been going on this week and how Wayfair's chosen to react. And then another detail that's been emerging was a report by Puck, which is an independent news site. There's one of the writers there actually has had, problems with Stephanie Jones allegedly in the past. And anyway, they're now saying that Blake Brown, the beauty company, apparently has experienced a 78% drop in sales. Now, this was published when it came to her lawsuit, and they said internal sales forecasts. The sudden, unanticipated negative publicity campaign released against Miss Lively down retail sales of Blake Brown by 56 to 78%. That is the way she is going to attempt damages, is to state that this press affected her brand, which will be very hard to identify. But supposedly Puck, who supposedly has an insider at Target, states that the line is not selling well at all. This is what Puck reported. Blake Brown launched its first new product since last summer, a haircare body mist. Just as Lively is now being accused by Baldoni's legal team of trying to essentially blackmail Taylor Swift, perhaps the most beloved pop star of her generation, into providing Lively with public support, or else risk the release of a decade's worth of private text between the stars as as I previously reported, the supposed source of Friedman's claim is said to be none other than Scott Swift Taylor's dad. Clearly, none of the above sat well with Swifties who avoided anything to do with Lively as a person. Someone close to Target said Blake Brown will sell less than $15 million in total sales in 2025. Blake Brown is a non-con chat at Target. The person said it fell from a $100 million brand to a $15 million brand, and clearly, apparently, Betty Boo's, which continues to be sold on Carnival Cruises, is also getting hurt, and their quote is, "It's ironic that one of Blake's dragons came back to bite her, just like in Game of Thrones." My source indicated, no one is supporting Blake over Taylor, including all of their mutual friends, and all of Taylor's fans. You do not try and blackmail Taylor. So in this narrative, they're saying the loss in her company has nothing to do with Belon, but the fact that Blake threatened Taylor, and that Taylor's father, Scott Swift, was the one who came forward to Brian Friedman, and it's been well documented that it was Scott Swift, and Wayfair has stated that they got information, they withdrew the subpoenas, and neither Scott nor Taylor has refuted any of these stories that they are the ones or he was the one who came forward and gave the information on them threatening Taylor. And then Taylor, her response after that news broke was not to refute it, but rather to report through her sources that she wants to get rid of her for good, because Blake created too many issues in her life. And then more reports of all the other friends like Cara Delevingne and Sophie Turner and Gigi Hadid all distancing themselves from her too and being loyal to Taylor Swift because they say that they can't trust someone that would do something like that to Taylor. I mean, could you, if you knew that you were 5 steps away from having dirt put out on you in the public? I think what the ironic part of this story to me more than anything is that these publicists, right, that are on the opposite side, so Leslie Sloan and Stephanie Jones, they are making these suits and they're suing for being defamed and being injured, but yet Leslie and Stephanie in the business of public publicity, their role is spreading news about clients, right? They spread tales and seed stories sometimes, and they chat with the media, and in the case that we're discussing, Stephanie is accused of spreading bad stories in the media about Blake that weren't in favor of her. But Blake is not suing her straight, and on the other side, Leslie's being charged with planting stories on Justin, and then Melissa and Jen Abel are being charged with operating an untraceable smear campaign, because nobody can literally point to any stories they planted straight, so they have to bundle it into an untraceable smear campaign. Meanwhile, it was their private text messages that were released, and their private info that was released, and Stephanie and Leslie's details were not leaked correctly. So the query for me is, if you are in the business of placing things into the media, and you are in the business of publicity for your public figures, shouldn't you then be in the business of realizing that if you get included in the story, you have to have a tough skin? Right? I mean, how many celebrities have been capable of existing under this facade where they were covered up by these PR agents that deflected information and inserted other narratives in an attempt to alter what we were listening to? Right? The days of PR have altered so profoundly due to social media, and, it's just ironic to me that these agents are threatening to sue everybody for reporting truth and threatening to sue the individuals that refuse to play their games, right? If you don't want to play the PR game and you don't want to get a statement from these agents because you don't think what the agents are saying is the truth, what's the use of printing out a statement from someone's agent if you know it will not be the truth, just so you won't get sued? I mean, Blake is going to pin this fall in the sales on not her threatening Taylor. She's going to say, no, it's all because of Justin. Which it would seem that the manner in which Puck is presenting this is it has nothing to do with Justin. It has to do with what Blake did to Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift is actually going to be the one that can all ultimately break down this whole case, because if your best friend doesn't stand with you, there's something wrong, seriously wrong in this story. So she's looking at more fallout, right? Her product lines aren't doing well. Betty Buzz isn't doing well. Betty Booze isn't doing well. And now it's not because of Justin. The reporting is because it's because of Taylor. I don't know how she's going to spin that, because that reporting actually will help Justin with his case against Blake, because it'll be well, I don't have anything to do with this. You're the one who did that, not me. I think for a long time, all these people they had PR teams that kept their secrets, and now it's no more. And then they sue people or threaten to sue people that won't cover for them, which is just a way of silencing and manipulating people, in my opinion anyway. So Blake is continuing her smear campaign against Justin. That's from Brian Friedman, and he doesn't want those briefs to be permitted. And then if it's about her hair care line, all that is due to Taylor Swift. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed, and tap the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, guys.